לא שומעים אותי. אני אחבק, כי תכף זה עוד לא התחיל.
אפשר שישדר מה כן, אני יכולה לעשות שלום. יש פה... זה כיסא שאתה התיק שלי, אתה יכול לשבת.
כן? אני שומר לך על התיק.
יאללה, לך. Okay, so I think maybe, yeah. I think we're just gonna get started. I know that there are some people that are still on the way looking for parking spots. 2 years of COVID probably left us with somewhat untrained skills of finding actually a parking and visiting a physical event. But I am happy for everybody who is here. So good afternoon, or should I say probably good evening, everybody. My name is Rita. I'm from the Kaima Center for Social Innovation. You're going to hear about the center in a second. And I'm very happy to be hosting this event today. So I actually get the cool job of asking some of the questions and introducing our awesome speakers and just making sure that this entire panel and event is being led in a great way and in a very enlightening and interesting way. But before we do that, as of course many of you know, this initiative, this event, and the course we're going to be launching later on is a collaboration between two organizations, the Israeli Forum for Impact Innovation and Kaima Center. And I guess without any further ado, I would like to introduce Vanessa, the CEO of the Impact Forum of the Israeli NAB, to say a few words. And we'll take it from here.
Thank you for showing up and making the time to be with us today. Thank you to our host, to be Yoel, which I'd like to say a few words. Thank you to Kaima, our partners. Thank you to Hila, our product manager, who is coordinating everything and doing everything behind the forum. So she definitely deserves a round of applause. Here to speak about impact management and measurement, which is part of what we're promoting as the Israeli Forum for Impact Economy. I won't bury you with the details. You can go into our website. We can set up one-on-one Zoom meetings to see how we can collaborate. Basically, we are all about cross-sector collaboration to promote solutions for global challenges. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. We're working in the context of the GSG, which is global entity that includes 32 other chapters, other NABs. We're hosting one of them, Rafael, from the French NAB. So it's a huge opportunity and a huge honor that she's giving some of her vacation time to us. And the way that we're promoting this cross-sector collaboration for solving the challenges is through our 5 pillars. Through awareness raising, policy making, supplier capital, demand for capital, and impact management and measurement. You can see some of our partners over here. Again, we're not the issue here. We're happy to hold a very professional event with amazing speakers. I want to invite Yoel to say a few words and honor us with his presence. Thank you for being here. Please follow up with us if you have any types of questions. And of course, please register for this amazing class.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Am I heard?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very much privileged to be the host. We're very much privileged to be the host of this meeting for everyone. Welcome to behalf of To Rehab is a place where big group is working, and also is a place that innovation for making a better world. Both at To Be Angels and To Be Community are platforms for that we invest in, and also the Business Roundtable. The Business Roundtable is a platform that gathers all the biggest corporations in Israel to make synergies to tackle social problems in a more effective way. We hope that when we make a synergy between the corporations, where we believe corporations are probably more effective than governments, then we might have a quantum leap in the way of social problems. And I think actually measuring impact is something that is extremely important for many aspects that I'm sure many of you know much better than I do and can explain it better than I do. But I think that the most important thing about measurement, one of the most important things, is that it brings us back to what truly business is. Yes, what is the real reason, the main reason for doing business? Well, the main reason for doing business is not to maximize profits, is to maximize welfare to all its stakeholders and also to fulfill its goal as a corporation. And I think that once we bring back to the table the concept of measurement, then actually we're repairing what I believe is the crisis in our collective consciousness, where we refer to maximizing profits as the thing that we should measure. Whereas actually a healthy business is a business that where the maximizing of profits and the maximizing of the social cause both combine together. Yeah, for example, if we take איך קוראים לזה עם הטכנולוגיה? לא Waze, נו שאני קוראים 19 מיליארד, Mobileye, yeah? Mobileye is a good example. The more we have Mobileye on cars, then maximizing profits for shareholders, but as well as minimizing car accidents. So I think this is one of the most important things. And also, once we're able, and hopefully we'll be able one day to speak in the same language with measurement, the impact, or globally as the way we can measure maximizing profits, then we will be able to see whether a corporation is good for society or bad for society, whether it's healthy or non-healthy, and we move for healthy and non-healthy, not for impact and non-impact, which is also something I believe which we should move forward to. And as I said, I'm very privileged, Vanessa, to host you, and בהצלחה רבה לכולם.
We have the figure. I found the figure for everybody who's wondering. So as I said, this is a collaboration between two institutions, and I'm sure you're very interested in learning more about management and measurement of impact. And it just so happens that we came prepared. So it's not just going to be an event, but actually towards the end of the session, we're going to be sharing more details about the course that is going to be opening up and led jointly by the Kaima Center at Haifa University and the Israeli Forum for Impact Economy. Sorry, I lost the word. Yeah. I'm going to try. Yeah, you're going to test me. And so I think maybe it's a good time to invite my dear friends here who will share a few words about us, Kaima, the Social Innovation Hub at Haifa University, and also share some valuable information about the course that we're opening up.
Thank you, Rita. Shalom, Erev Tov, good evening, hi. I am the acting director of Kaima. I'm the acting director of Kaima for the last 24 hours, so I'm quite excited. I hope I'll get my pitch right, and don't feel me. Kaima is the Haifa University Center for Impact and Social Innovation, and as we are partnered to this event with it just goes without saying that we would like to enhance the discussion and action in Israel around impact economy and social innovation. And we take obviously the academic approach in trying to bring more of the academic knowledge to the discourse and in Israel and enhance, as I said, the discussion. With the permission of our foreign guests, I'll switch to Hebrew because my next slide is mostly aimed at the Israeli audience here.
אתה בודק כאילו כמה אני קשובה. נערת הגלגל, כן.
תודה. באמת הערב הזה הוא חלק מהתהליך שקיימה ביחד עם הפורום והרבה מאוד שותפים אחרים באקוסיסטם הישראלי מובילים כדי להעמיק את השיח ותעשייה בנושא של מדידת אימפקט. אנחנו לא רק מדברים, אנחנו גם עושים, ולכן אני רוצה גם להציג בפניכם את הקורס שאנחנו נפתח בעוד זמן מאוד מאוד קצר, מיועד לדוברי עברית ואנגלית, קורס שנעשה בשיתוף פעולה עם מרצה מובילה מחו"ל. הוא קורס ממוקד שייתן לכם את העומק, את הידע, את הכלים שאתם צריכים וגם את ההתנסות המעשית בנושא של מדידת אימפקט. אנחנו נפתח אותו בתחילת אפריל, הפרטים גם בשקף כאן שאני מקווה שאתם תשימו אותו בפייסבוק, וגם כמובן ברור לנו שלא הכל ברור ולא הכל קרי כאן, אפשר לדבר איתי בסוף האירוע, אפשר להיכנס לאתר שקיימה כדי להשאיר פרטים ואנחנו נחזור אליכם, אבל באמת המטרה שלנו היא שאחרי הערב הזה אתם תחליטו לעשות מעשה ולהירשם לקורס. ואני כאן אומר ככה בצורה מאוד ברורה, כתור מנהל בפועל מזה 24 שעות, שיש לי יעדים, והיעד שלי הוא שכמה שיותר אנשים שיושבים כאן בקהל היום יירשמו לקורס, אז אנחנו לא רק באימפקט מז'מנט,
משכורת לפי pay for success.
זה אקדמיה, אני לא מקבל משכורת.
מתנדב, מה שנקרא.
אבל אנחנו, כן, אני נמדד, אז תעזרו לי בבקשה, ובאמת אני כאן בסוף הערב, בכל שאלה ולהחליט פרטים, כדי שנוכל באמת ליצור את הקשר, לעניין אתכם גם בקורס הזה, גם בקורסים אחרים. תודה רבה שהגעתם, ותהנו הערב, והצלחה.
יאללה.
Here's the training.
So yeah, do sign up because the first get be measured on it. Okay, so without any further ado, let me just maybe go back one slide or two, or I don't know how many are we going here in this. There are two sections to this event. We're gonna first have a keynote speaker who we're gonna introduce in a second, and we're gonna open up in a bit of a broader context, and we're gonna talk about impact management before we talk about specific models of paying for success and how do you finance this. The general question we're going to ask, how do you manage your impact and how do you decide where do you want to invest your additional dollar, euro, shekel, or what might that be? And then we're going to move to a distinguished panel. I'm actually going to physically move, so Facebook beware. We're going to move to the other side of the room, and then we're going to have a panel with international perspective talking about pay for success models. And with that in mind, let me just read this out because it's a mouthful and there's a lot of information about Nigel. Okay, we're invited to come join me here, but Nigel Ball is the executive director of Go Lab at Oxford, which is a very unique institution that brings together both practice and research and policy making in terms of trying to influence the way policy is made and bringing the different perspective to the table. Prior to joining the Go Lab, Nigel was part of the founding team of West London Zone for Children and Young People, where he set up the Collective Impact Bond, which leveraged multiple public and private sources of funding to be paid when the children supported achieved positive results, so pay for success models. Nigel's previous roles include being the head of innovation at Teach First, leading educational charity, and supporting social entrepreneurship in East Africa. He's also a qualified teacher, having learned his craft in a secondary school and ethics, am I pronouncing it right? In Manchester, He holds a first-class BA in English and Linguistics from the University of York. So, and that's a short version. There's actually a much longer one if you go on the Oxford website. But I decided to spare you, but obviously we're very lucky and proud to have you with us. And the floor is yours for the keynote.
Thank you, Rita, for such a wonderful introduction. Very nice. I'm going to try and clip this here. You guys might have a bit of a laugh if I trip over this wire, so because I'm not very good at standing still when I'm presenting. So just warn me if that happens. Great to be here. Shalom. Good evening. Great to see you all. Those of you that are standing in the wings, please find a seat. Don't feel uncomfortable because I'm going to be talking for quite a long time. Great to be here. Great to be here in Israel again. Lovely. I love spending time here. This is my third time in Israel ever, and I'm sure I'll be back. But I'm going to bring you a bit of insight from what we do at the Go Lab and what we do in the UK. Let me find that clicker. Here we go. So let's get to the start. That's me. Okay. First, a bit about the Go Lab, the Government Outcomes Lab. So we were set up 5 years ago as a partnership between the UK government, specifically the part of the UK government that's responsible for civil society. So by that, we mean NGOs, basically charities, as we tend to call them in the UK. And the government at the time was very interested in social impact bonds, and they wanted more and more and more social impact bonds because the minister at the time was very keen on this model. The university was not so interested in seeing more and more social impact bonds, but recognized that generally the government was not very good at commissioning NGOs to deliver services, contracting, commissioning, contracting, we use the word interchangeably. I wanted to do more research to see how that could be improved, to see how those partnerships could be enhanced. So this center was set up called the Government Outcomes Lab. And I joined having set up a social impact bond, as Rita explained, in West London, which was all about collaboration. We brought multiple commissioners on board, and they wanted someone to come in to this research center who had actually done this in the field, in real life, in practice. What I have learned over 5 years, one of the many things I've learned over 5 years, is it is very difficult to bridge the gap between academic research and real world practice and policy making. And by the way, it's hard enough to bridge the gap between policy and practice on the ground. Then you bring in academic research, adds a whole new challenge. So my next talk will be on that. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. But the illustration of the bridge there was what we put in our recent 5-year report. And if you are, because I know a lot of you work in academic centers here, if you are interested in what we've learned through that practice of trying to bring academic insights to practice, please do read our 5-year report, because we've let all of our secrets out into the world through that. And this illustration is taken from that, trying to illustrate how we bridge that gap. So that's the Go Lab. What we study is cross-sector partnerships for better social impact, basically. And that's what I'm going to talk about today broadly. And within that, I'm going to talk about impact measurement and management. But first, I would like to know a little bit about who's in the room today, who my audience is. So I, make sure that I touch all the right buttons for everybody. So we're going to do this the old-fashioned way, because it's very exciting to be in person again. This is probably my first proper in-person event. I know that there are some people joining online, but this feels a bit like the old world, which is wonderful. So we're going to do it by show of hands. So let's just go down the list as it is there. Anyone here from the government? It doesn't have to be the Israeli government, but anyone from a central government? No, that's what I thought. Former. Great. Welcome. You escaped. Well, hopefully some on the video will get to see it at some point. Local government. Anyone here from local government? No? Any former local government? No, those ones are still there, still in the thick of things, good, doing great work. Service provider, NGO or private sector who actually deliver services. Quite a number, maybe a third. Foundation, corporate impact investor, the money people. Okay, a few over there in the wings. I noticed they're the ones standing up.
Considering if that's their topic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's right. And none of the above. So I guess, what are you? Consultants, academic, anything else?
Microsoft.
Microsoft's corporate. Okay,
Corporate.
brilliant. Okay, great. Well, that gives me a bit of a clue. So thank you for that. Right. What I wanted to ask yourself throughout this talk is two questions, basically. The first one is, what is motivating you or your organization's need to measure and manage impact? Because we can talk a lot about how to manage impact, but you can go on a course on how to manage impact, as we've just heard, and please do, because where's Sakura gone? There you are. Yeah. Okay. You'll help him do well in his job, his acting job. So I'm not going to talk too much about how. I'm going to talk more about why. So think about why. Why are you doing this? Why does it matter? And the second part of the question, slightly more provocatively, is: are you really doing it because you see value in it for your own organization, or are you doing it because someone else has asked you to? One of your stakeholders has demanded it, or maybe you're the stakeholder demanding it of others. In which case, you should especially be asking this question of why. Why am I getting my, my funding or those accountable to me to do this whole question thing? So keep those two questions in mind as we go through. Okay, this is the really simple sort of textbook answer. Most of you will have come across this as to why measure impact. This is the really, basic 101. Prove and improve. So prove that what I've done has made a difference, but also as I do it, continuously improve as I go along. Okay, and that's something, that you're probably all quite used to. I've added a little bit more nuance just to make it slightly more interesting, which is sort of a micro program level and a macro or policy level. So at the program level, particularly those of you that are in NGOs and provider organizations, you might be proving it because you want to understand what works, if you want to do it again. If you're a policymaker commissioning a service, does it work? Should we commission it again? And improve is, so that in the boardroom or the management meeting every week, you can make the right decisions and know where to put your resources. There's a higher level as well to this whole prove, improve thing. And this is what a lot of politicians, ministers, policymakers might be thinking about. A lot of academics think about this sort of thing as well. The proving bit is often about public accountability. So we need to know this works because the public are demanding to know that their taxpayer, dollars, shekels, whatever, are being well spent. And on the improve bit, the really ambitious thing, and Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner, did their keynote talk at our last conference last year. And we were very lucky. It's online if you want to go and check it out. But what he talked a lot about was we need to better understand the population's social, not just economic condition. We've got decades of experience collecting statistics and calculating GDP accurately and all sorts of other economic metrics on productivity and outputs and so on and so forth that enable policymakers to tune up the economy of a country. We don't have that for social metrics. We really don't have that infrastructure. Some countries have attempted to set it up. Scotland, Bhutan, New Zealand, often small countries. So, Israel, innovative place, maybe take a leaf out of their book. But we're not very good at doing it. So there's a macro level to this improve as well. Okay, just a little bit on the methods. I don't know how much of this you already know, but I wanted to sort of cover a bit of it off anyway. I see this as a cycle, okay? So the during bit, that's the improving, monitoring progress, managing performance. And after, have you met your targets and you do the impact evaluation to prove whether it worked or not. But critically, it is a cycle, because why do you do that proving bit? It's not just so you can sleep well at night, it's to inform the next decision. And the next decision is probably going to require, I'm sorry, that's font's gone small, forecasts and models. You need to be able to look forward to what you're doing next. And for that, you need to make sure you evaluated what you did before. So, let's remember it's a cycle with three parts, with the ex ante and the ex post, as well as the managing performance. But also, often, these two last ones get conflated. The during and the after get mixed together. We see it all as the same thing. It's just measuring and managing impact. But actually, they're really quite different. They're different practices. They happen at different times. They cover a different scope. And I think almost more importantly than anything else, they come from a very different school of thought. And if you're practicing this stuff, you probably don't think very much about where some of these methodologies came from. You just do them. But actually, performance management has been very intensively studied by schools of management and business schools. some of you from business schools, you'll know this better than I do. Whereas the impact evaluation bit, and I'm going to talk a bit about that in a moment, comes from the scientific method. You know, we're all very familiar with it from the medical, you know, field mainly. You know, and the vaccines that went through trials, you know, we've all benefited from. You know, that scientific method has been applied to social issues and social interventions, and that's where that comes from. And I think it's really quite important to remember that you're dealing with methods here that, you know, are very well established, have been studied a lot, but from a very different perspective. So I think it's a mistake to just smash them all together. You need to recognize that the measuring of impact and the purposes for which you're doing it come from quite different, if you like, discipline schools of thought. Sorry, again, the font has gone very tiny there, not sure why, the formatting went wrong, but just a bit on performance management. I've given you a definition there from Don Moynihan, who's a US academic, who's very big on this, has association with our School of Government in Oxford as well. That's his definition. I'll read it out for those at the back in case you can't see it. A system that generates performance information through strategic planning and performance measurement routines, and connects this information to decision venues where ideally the information influences a range of possible decisions. That's the sort of standard definition of what performance management is. But there are very different ways of doing it. Sometimes that decision venue that he talks about might be a boardroom, and it might happen once a quarter. There you're going to have a very top-down method of performance management, because if things are going wrong, that board is probably going to say, you know, let's sack everyone, let's change the director, change the leadership. You know, they might take quite a ruthless approach. But you can also get performance management that's much more participative and really seeks to involve the people working at the front line and on the ground, and asks the people who are actually working with the beneficiaries of your intervention, what do you think we should change? You're meeting these people every day. And so there are methodologies around that, like rapid cycle testing, so more collaborative ways of doing performance management. So again, you know, we talk a lot about impact management. It is a science, you know, it's been studied, but there are very different ways of doing it, and a lot of debates about what the right approach is. And then impact evaluation. So this is the proved bit. This is the bit that comes from the scientific method. And in that scientific method, it has a very specific meaning. And this is something that we struggle with sometimes in an academic institution, because my academic colleagues always use the word impact with this technical definition, which is very easy to understand. So it's not technical. It's not, you know, it's nothing hard to understand about that. The difference between what happened and what would have happened if you hadn't run the program. But most people out there in the world, if you like, don't use the word impact to mean that. They use it in a much more general way. So why does that matter? Well, it does matter, actually. It really does matter quite a lot, because the reason why impact has this technical definition is because of this issue of dead weight and additionality. Okay, and this is trying to illustrate why this matters, because these are your outcomes. Say, for example, you're running an intervention that's trying to get employed people into work. And say you're doing this at a time of economic growth. It's hard to remember a time of economic growth, I know, but let's imagine it's 10. Okay, so the number of unemployed people is the number of employed people. Say this is the number of employed people. It's going to be going up anyway because there's more jobs around. Okay, then you take your intervention, right? And of course, because economic growth is continuing, the number of people in jobs keeps going up. And then at the end of it, great, you can take the credit for that, can you? No. You need to know what would have happened if your program hadn't occurred. And it's true in the opposite direction. If we're in a recession and the number of jobs is going down, perhaps you manage to flatline it by getting some of these people into jobs. Okay, it's a very simplistic example, but it illustrates why actually this technical definition of impact is really important, because particularly when you start adding money into the equation, people are being paid for outcomes that they achieved, you need to have some way of working out what may have happened anyway. You don't have to run a randomized controlled trial, by the way. There are different methodologies out there, propensity score matching, there's all sorts of, you know, techniques and methodologies, ways of estimating that. You can never know it, by the way. It's an alternative reality that never happened. So you can only ever estimate it. There are lots of methodologies for estimating it. But beware, if that hasn't happened, beware of the claims that are being made, because maybe that would have happened anyway. So it is important. However, this impact evaluation, this technical definition does have big drawbacks, which is why it doesn't always happen. The first is replicability or generalizability. Okay, so if you have done your impact evaluation to prove if something works or not, so you know whether to do it again, that relies on the assumption that whatever the circumstances were in Haifa when you ran the unemployment program there, they're also true in Tel Aviv or London or Nairobi or wherever it is you're running it next. And obviously that's rarely true. And in fact, you know, if you can't replicate your result in a different context, your experiment was bad. That's what scientists would say. So that's quite a big issue. That's quite a big issue. Another one is complexity, not of the methods. I mean, the methods are complex. You need some training to understand how to do this stuff. But actually the complexity of the social issues. Because, you know, if you're an unemployed person, perhaps you're a refugee, perhaps you had housing issues, perhaps you have substance misuse issues, perhaps you have a family, perhaps you don't. All of these people come in the bucket of being unemployed. They have very different issues around them. And you need to have enough people amongst the group you're helping and amongst the group you're comparing them to be able to run that statistical analysis and be sure that you have, you know, even averaged out all of those differences between them. And it's really difficult to do. You know, the world is complex, people's lives are complex. It's very difficult to create that reliable comparison group. And then finally, the cost. These things are really, really expensive to run, particularly because you're doing the same monitoring and measurement for a group of people that you're not helping. And your first obstacle is just persuading that group of people to be measured without actually receiving any benefit. So there are limitations to impact evaluation, which is why practically it doesn't often happen. So already there's a bit of a snag and a dilemma here, because you're going to hear claims being made, but actually to really validate those claims is very difficult. Where do we go? We'll talk a bit more about that later. So that was just a bit around kind of the how of how you measure and manage impact. Hopefully that was some of that was new and got you thinking a little bit. The final thing I'll say on it is that, you know, despite all of these problems, issues, things to consider, I would advocate, and the clue is in our name, government outcomes, that the use of outcomes generally is a really good thing. And orienting whatever you're doing towards outcomes rather than towards activities. So towards what you actually expect those beneficiaries, you know, how you expect their condition or their lives to improve, rather than what you're doing for them, is a really, really useful discipline and mindset to get into. So this is just a little bit, I won't spend long on this, you know, what outcomes are, how they can be used as targets. You need to find good, reliable indicators of those outcomes. That's not easy, but you know, this is all stuff that you can learn on the course. And finally, you know, what data you might be able to access on those outcomes. You know, there's administrative data out there. Statistical authorities collect lots of stuff that is useful for this if you can only get hold of it, or you can go and collect your own data. Anyway, I don't need to talk any more about that right now. So that's the how. Let's get on to what I think is a more interesting question, which is the why. This is a quote from the keynote speech that Joseph Stiglitz gave at our conference that I mentioned earlier. What gets measured gets done. This is his view. You may not agree, but you know, most of you probably do. There's a big focus. Anything that you can measure seems to happen. Again, I'll use COVID as a great example of this, because we've got these little tests, didn't we, that we could all do at home. And suddenly, policymakers could see how many infections there were. And we all went into and out of lockdown according to that information. Think of the things that we couldn't measure, like the well-being, the families that couldn't see each other, the people that had to die alone, you know, at the start of them, and the mental load that put on people. All of these things we can't measure. There's no simple diagnostic test for that. That wasn't weight. It wasn't given the same weight in those decisions. And I'm not claiming, by the way, that it was the wrong decisions were made, but it's just an interesting example of this. What gets measured gets done. So I want to just think a little bit about why is that? Why have we ended up in the place where what gets measured gets done from a sort of public policy perspective? So first, a bit of history. Imagine this is a sort of long uphill struggle of public policy since around about, the Second World War. So sort of modern social democratic democracies like the ones that I suspect most of us live in, the state got very involved in delivering social services and in funding services for everyone, but particularly for disadvantaged parts of society. And at first, they did that quite monolithically in a lot of countries. It wasn't quite centralized. The government had their own departments for doing this, but slowly it became more privatized, more outsourced. Things like purchase and private split. NGOs became more involved, private companies became more involved. This is a pattern that's been seen in the US, in the UK, no doubt in Israel as well. Some methodologies came up, new public management, which sort of tried to apply some of the kind of business management practices to the public sector, and centralization and control. Not in every country, but definitely in the UK. From what I gather, that's a bit of a feature here in Israel as well. Other countries have more federal systems that are less centralized. But definitely the desire for control, I think, is probably quite common. And then now, I think, much more awareness of the patterns of inequality and how they need to be dealt with regionally, across ethnic and cultural groups. And that's starting to then play into public policy much more as well. So as this has been happening, it's done strange things to the way we look at impact measurement and management. Because one of the results is you have this great complexity. And I mentioned this earlier. So, just imagine this man and his son there are having a hard time in life, whatever barriers and obstacles they may have faced, things have gone a little bit wrong. They may find a lot of the state's institutions and its agents are trying to help, all with the best of intentions and plenty of money, by the way. So perhaps you've got a work coach helping get into work, mental health to help with that issue, a counselor, probation officer if he's got, he's got offending issues, social worker, housing officer, whatever. Okay, great. Plenty of support, you think. But, each of these then reports into its own, part of the state or its own NGO, perhaps. So now we've got 9 organizations there, all trying to help this one man and his son. They then report into the next level up. They report into their central government departments. And then, of course, the treasury and the money people, they make all the ultimate decisions on this stuff. So that's a mess. And what that means for that man is that, and this has been observed in research a lot, is these people in this situation just disengage because it's such a mess. No one's working with each other. They have to tell their story multiple times. They can't build good relationships. Everyone's got, each of these institutions have slightly different priorities and they're measuring different things. And they're all trying to get something slightly different out of this person who's supposedly there to help. So, and this happens. We're familiar with this. I made this up, actually. This isn't a real example, but it illustrates the point. This is a real example. So this is a project that we are researching at the moment. And it's a council, a local authority in the north of England. And they had supposedly one service to help adults who need support to live independently. Okay, I mean, that sounds simple enough. They had 15 contracts with 9 different organizations to achieve this one goal. And this is just a single local authority. We have over 200 of them. It's crazy. And actually, they've now launched a really interesting project, which we're researching, which is structured through a social impact bond, to bring these 15 contracts into one contract that gets these 9 providers working together. So it's a really exciting project. I can talk more about it later if you want. And we're really keen to see if it works, and we hope it does. And actually, the focus on outcomes and measuring outcomes is part of what's helping to get these 9 providers working together and collaborating, because they've agreed on the same set of outcomes, the same set of goals that they need to work to. But look at the mess that was there before. And if you don't have someone like, what was good about the social impact bond is you actually had these outside external parties come in and try and sort this out. Because the governments themselves don't have capacity. They just rolled these contracts over from, there was a grant in Tony Blair's time in the 90s that enabled them to do all of this work, and then they got squeezed and squeezed. No one had time to really sort out the contracts. They just kept renewing them, and you ended up with this mess. And this is pretty typical in the UK, maybe typical here as well. I don't know.
Major, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't know if it does, but how does the private sector fit into the picture? There is a lot of intentionality and services, or to add volunteering, or to add kind of contributing specific solutions. Do they fit in a way in this picture or not at all?
I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I'm going to come on to that. Yes. I think the short answer is yes in two ways. Three ways potentially. One is through social investment. Another is because some of these providers are, I'm not sure if any of these are private, but I don't believe they are, but a lot of, in the UK, a lot of the providers of social services are private organizations. And in fact, we have a serious mess in our children's care market, because a lot of the residential, a lot of children's homes, orphanages, as we used to call them, are run by venture capital backed, private equity backed companies. It's a mess. So that's a bad example of the private sector. But that's the second, and I think the third is through sort of what you say, corporates getting involved through their social responsibility and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think there's value there, but I think there are questions to be asked, which I'll come on to. Okay, so how does all of this, so that's a bit of the context of, the sort of social policy environment that we're doing this impact measurement in. One of the problems with this is that this impact evaluation methodology that I talked about earlier, this scientific method, philosophically speaking, is trying to get to the truth. And, truth is pretty important these days, in this post-truth world. It'd be really nice to get to the truth. And this method is intended to observe the truth, if you believe that's possible. The problem is that there are different forms of truth depending on who you are, right? And this, I think, is a nice table because it kind of illustrates that point. That, everyone, to some extent, has their own truth, right? And, anyone who works the front line, or a lot of people who work in charities and work very closely with beneficiaries of these services and have a lot of solidarity with them, see the world through their eyes, not through the eyes of the bureaucrats who are actually making decisions on funding, where funding is allocated. So it's a different version of the truth. And there's a movement of people saying we need to involve those people much more in the decisions that are being made, actually, because they have a valuable perspective. And unfortunately, it's not numbers, it's not things that you can measure or be paid on. It's usually stories, it's ethnography, it's anecdotal if you want to critique it. But is it an important source of information for decision making? Yeah, probably it is, if you really want to make an impact. So this is really just a caution that we love numbers because we're used to managing economies. I'm saying we, as if we're a national government, we love to make decisions with numbers, but actually things look different depending on who you are. If you're in the management, if you're in the community, whatever.
I'm not sure that holistic, abstract right, the big to holistic. If you see holistic, it's something that you see the whole and also the complete. So that abstract wouldn't be the
I don't know that these critiques are necessarily valid, to be honest. I just think they are made. It's a nice table because it just shows that there's different perspectives and people often have quite a disparaging view of the other perspective. But no, I mean, I'm not allowed to say anything bad about academic institutions.
You'll be fired.
Yeah, fair. Okay. And then I've talked a bit about COVID already, but this is just some of the things that we have seen in our work that COVID has changed, or not really changed, but accelerated things that we've already seen. Okay, so public procurement has become more prominent and about time too, because billions and billions and billions of taxpayer money is spent through public procurement processes, and they're often done very badly. And I think we saw that with PPE and vaccines. We saw both ends of that spectrum in many countries. The power of the local community, again, about time that we started to recognize this. Okay, so we had neighbors helping out their elderly neighbors or whatever, who were isolated. but also the enforcement of public health rules. You know, people decided that they didn't want to stay at home, didn't want to wear masks or whatever. The state doesn't have enough policing power to enforce that. It's enforced through the social consensus. Increase in corporate power, you know, this is contestable, I suppose, but certainly an increase in the awareness of corporate power. I think when you look at some of the disconnects between stock markets and the real economy, it looks, you know, those sorts of things bring great awareness to corporate power. Patterns of inequality, we have Black Lives Matter movement in the middle of the pandemic, also the health inequalities that were exposed by the pandemic. And finally, increasing reach of the government into citizens' lives. So economically, through all that, you know, economic support was provided to families, but also socially, you know, because there's huge constraints put on the civil liberties of populations all over the world. And what I think that has done when it comes to impact measurement and management is, and this is where I'll come on to the corporate point, is made us think much more in our research lab about power and who has it and who's really calling the shots and making the decisions. So the first thing to think about when it comes to power is are we seeing an increase in private power, and should we welcome it? Okay, I've just put an illustrative stat there, which is ESG investing is going up. That's good, right? More money going into, you know, investing in economic, social, and governance companies with good ESG stats. Okay, great. But there's a big debate there, and actually this was another debate we had at our conference with one of our professors, and also someone, Dambisa Moyo, who sits on the board of 3 blue chip corporates. And we thought it was going to be a debate, but actually they agreed that on the first of these two sort of ways forward, that actually we should be strengthening the guardrails that prevent corporate power from undermining the public interest, because corporate interests do not rely well enough on public interests, and corporates need to be regulated, because otherwise they will, you know, do whatever they can to serve their main stakeholder, which is their shareholders. So that's a perspective. The other perspective is that we should actually, you know, corporate power is something that we should be co-opting towards social ends, and we should be inviting these private interests more and more to help us, because the social issues we're facing are so difficult. And that's also a valid perspective. And you'll see more and more companies talk about their purpose, recognize their purpose beyond just making money. So we should be welcoming this. I don't think these are a binary. No, is that what you were going to say? I don't think any of these are a binary. I'm just being a bit provocative here. Okay? But I think there are 2 genuine perspectives that don't always fit together, or they need to really, you need to work to put them together. So that's one thing to think
Maybe,
about.
if I may, think of the gap. Well, the first statement applies to developed countries, advanced, rich economies. Second one applies to developing countries.
Maybe, but you could say that companies in developing countries, if they're less constrained by regulation, they can offer goods more cheaply, they can outcompete the richer, you know, companies that are more regulated. So I don't know. I think there's
the notion that private companies should be encouraged to contribute to achieving social and environmental goals comes from the understanding that no matter how much public money will be spent in developing countries, we will never be able to meet their needs, or even the basic needs. That has been the logic. In developed economies, it doesn't always apply because we're already there. So we are already, and then therefore we need to limit that.
Yeah.
But if you don't have any limits on the developing world, then how do you make sure they're not abusing the population?
It can go both
I
ways.
never said it was easy.
Okay. So you see what I mean?
Yeah, we agree.
It's a debate. Good. So this is what I wanted. All right, I'm glad you're thinking. Public procurement. I said I think, you know, it's good that this is getting more prominence. 12% of GDP in the OECD, not even 12% government spending of GDP. That's massive on public procurement. These are things that the government asks other people to do and gives them money for. Right? It's so underlooked. And again, there's a big debate here, and this is a debate that you know comes up a lot in our work. Should we keep focusing on due process? So just run the most efficient process, you know, get really good competition in the market. So you get the lowest price, highest quality for the lowest price, and you minimize corruption, right? Because that's very wasteful. Or should we kind of go the opposite direction and look much more at building positive partnerships so that we can make the most of the alignment of goals between the government and the supplier? Because often the government and the supplier are aligned in goals. So why are we getting all these suppliers to compete with each other? Because they all have the same goals as each other and as the government is doing the buying. So we should be building collaborations, we should be building relationships. And this issue of wider social value. Social value procurement is another topic some of you may be familiar with, which is this idea that when we're spending this taxpayer money on chairs, you know, we could also be getting it from a company, you know, who, I'm making this up as I go along, but, you know, gets their metal from recycled sources or whatever, okay? You know what I mean? It's what can we buy and also buy a bit extra on top? You know, can we get the hospital catering from the supplier that works with ex-offenders, you know, people that have been to prison and need to be reintegrated into society? It's that idea, which is nice, but inefficient. Economically speaking, it's inefficient. If you ask an economist, they say that's a waste. So,
is that general procurement or procurement of social services?
No, general procurement.
Social value, well, good question, because this is the real difficulty, and this is something that, again, we debate a lot, is if you're procuring social services, you're getting the social value already, because that's what you would buy. So social value, the Social Value Act in the United Kingdom was intended to help NGOs get into public supply chains. But actually NGOs, as you point out, are already providing social value. So what it's in fact done is favored companies who have good CSR departments. So exactly, if you like, the opposite of the intended effect. So anyway, there's an interesting bit of research to be done there. Okay, and then finally, with a big question mark on the power issue, increase in people power. Okay, and I'm nearly done. So as I said, you know, we know that COVID drove up government spending and constraints of the liberties. We saw a big increase in government power during COVID. We may get that power back as individuals, but you know, we may not. Some of it may stay. Okay, should we welcome that? In, you know, if we live in a democracy, we get to throw out the government every 5 years or 4 years. You know, the ministers should be responding to the public mood. So actually, this is okay. Wouldn't we quite like the government to be the one setting the terms of success, rather than the big corporates or, you know, or the NGOs that are lobbying for a particular pet cause or whatever? Yeah, you know, the democratic process is good, but actually, there's a big democratic deficit, as we know. Ministers come and go, they have their own pet causes. They're a very, very long way, as I said earlier, from issues. You know, they're responding to the national political environment, whereas a lot of these issues really, you know, most problematic at the local level, or they're regional in marginalized regions. So because of that democratic deficit, you know, there's also an argument that actually we need to be bringing citizens or service users, and they're different, into this process of deciding what outcomes to measure and how, and showing them whether the achievement has been made. So if you like, bringing the accountability down to the people that are actually being helped, to the people that are actually part of that community, and localizing things much more. Okay, so you should be thinking about power, basically, and those are three different things. So I think there's two contrasting conclusions from this. Again, this is a false dichotomy. Okay, so before you try and pull me up on this, it's just I'm, you know, trying to be provocative and get you thinking. I think, you know, one road we could go down as a result of this is actually we need to be doing more impact evaluations, and we need to get that process working better, because we need to get to the truth. The only way to get to the truth is to use the scientific method, and we need to make it cheaper and easier so that everyone can. That's one road you can go down. Improve measurement. The other road you can go down is say, you know, that's never going to be, it's just not practical, it's too expensive, you put all those drawbacks with complexity. So let's instead democratize the knowledge, make more use of greater forms of knowledge, end our obsession with numbers. The numbers have a place, but they're not the only thing. Let's give equal weight to the stories, and let's trust each other more, and stop trying to catch each other out, but accept that a lot of the time the goals are aligned, and we should make greater use of trust. I think there's big problems with both of those pathways, and I want to find a way through the middle. But I think, those are the sort of two directions you sort of could end up taking when you think about some of these things. Okay, and then finally, I said I promised Rita I would land on paper success, because that's what our panel is going to be about shortly. So I guess most of you, if not all of you, know what paper success is when payment is linked to those outcomes that you're measuring. So paper success puts impact measurement front and center. Okay, suddenly it's, the stakes are raised. It's given additional importance. What we've seen from our research, we do a lot of research into paper success and social impact funds in particular, is they do have potential to unlock prevention, collaboration, innovation. These are long-standing sort of El Dorado for public policy. If only we could prevent these social problems happening. If only we could get people working together more. If only we could be more innovative. And paper success models do seem to help that to happen in some cases. But again, the big debate here is: are they about increasing accountability? So are they really about the measurement and making sure that we're paying for the impact we get? Because that's how they were conceived, and that's why politicians liked them. Or are they about the collaboration? Is it about the fact that the measures mean that you can get different stakeholders aligned around the same set of goals which they agree on? Measuring. Maybe they're about both. But there's definitely a big debate about what's really the purpose of paper success. I'm sure I'll talk more about paper success in the panel. Okay, finally, a plug. Hopefully I've given you enough to chew on intellectually. So this bit's easy. This is just to talk a little bit about what we've got going on at the Go Lab. So this is a screenshot from our Global Impact Bond data set. If you don't know about it, please go there. Vanessa told me you have seven SIBs, impact bonds, confirmed. In Israel, we only have 3 of them in our database. So please sort that out for us. Help sort that out. Great. So do check into the database. Those are the global figures at the bottom there, at least the ones that we know about, and we do our best to know about them all. We've got loads of other resources on our sites, not all on paper success, but a lot of it is. So we've got case studies, technical guidance, blogs, which discuss some of these wider issues I've been talking about, and peer learning communities as well. If you prefer to talk rather than read, do check out our peer learning communities. We have one on social value procurement, as I mentioned. I have one for motives for measurement, where I talk about some of this stuff. And we have one on public value and so on. So do have a look, it's all on our website. And finally, I'll come back to the 2 questions I asked you at the start, because maybe your answer has slightly changed now, at least I've got you thinking about it a little bit more. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that was interesting.
Maybe take a question or 2 if anybody wants to ask Nigel something.
I can tell I'm in Israel because people just interrupted us on this. That would never happen in the UK.
Thank you then. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm gonna.
I didn't